So, Doom Eternal's second, but also its last story-based DLC, released about a week ago. Based on my few playthroughs, it is nothing short of a flawed masterpiece. Like Hans Zimmer without an orchestra, or Michelangelo without his paintbrush, or Anvil without his hammer. The potential is extremely high, but in its current position, it doesn't really reach that point in a few key areas. In this video, I'll be going through all the things that I really liked and disliked. So, without further delay, let's begin. Now, I'm not a professional reviewer, and this is pretty much my first ever real review of a video game. So, I'll be structuring this review in a systematic and logical way, starting with the launch of the game. So let's first talk about the download of the DLC. The download of Tag 2 was quite straightforward and a marked improvement over Tag 1, which had issues with many players, specifically on the Bethesda launcher, unable to play the game because the game would not validate their season pass. It took a few hours for it to be fixed. Comparing it to Tag 2, the validation was instant and the majority of the players were able to play it straight away. It shows that they clearly gained some valuable knowledge from the previous release and were able to apply those lessons to this launch. So for that, I have to commend its software. Opening up the game, you are met with a new main menu music, which I personally really like. This ambience sets the tone for this DLC, and to the end of the Slayer's saga, at least for now. Now, I know a lot of people do not like the sudden change to the main menu music, which I fully understand. But if you've played games as a live service, like an MMO with multiple expansions, then you're probably used to hearing a new login music every time a DLC or expansion drops. So for me, I have no issues because I'm quite used to it, but I would like to see more options in the future. Moving on. When you go to start a new game on a new save, you're met with a personal message and some advice before starting this DLC. Now, this is fine and well, but the problem is that this shows every time you start a new save, regardless if you've completed the DLC before or not. The message also plays when you have tutorials set to off. I believe this will be fixed at some point in the future, so there's not much else I can really add. Another problem that has been copied over from Tag 1 is having to reset your runes and weapon mods as soon as you start a new save. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it is quite minor, but I really would have expected it to be fixed by now. Because every time when you start a new save, for example if you're doing Ultra Nightmare on Tag 1 or Tag 2, you have to always reset your runes and mods every single time. So I'm hoping that this is fixed at some point in the future. One thing that I can say is one of the best things about this DLC is the start to the story. It quite literally picks up from where it left off in the Ancient Gods Part 1. In most games, including Doom Eternal, there is always some sort of time skip that is never really answered or acknowledged. For example, the ending of the base game to the beginning of Tag 1. Or a much better example is the time skip between Doom 2016 and Eternal. So in this case, the fact that it picks up directly after the cutscene of Tag 1 is incredible. It really feels like you're in a direct continuation of the story. So for any new or returning players that play through Tag 1 and Tag 2 in one sitting, it will really give you a great cinematic experience while keeping the story consistent, which is very important. In this review, I won't be talking about the story all that much, and the things that I liked and disliked, because the DLC has only really been out for about 2 weeks, and I'd rather put all my thoughts and suggestions regarding the story in its own separate video, so make sure you subscribe for that. So the DLC comes with 4 missions that you play through, and they are as follows. First of all, you have World Spear, then you have Reclaimed Earth, then Imora, and finally the Dark Lord, who has the boss fight as a single mission all to himself. So let's start with the first mission, the World Spear. The aesthetics of this world is breathtaking, because it is set on the planet of Argent D'Nur. Seeing the cosmic spear in the background is incredible, and also gives you, the player, a sense of direction where you know that that massive shard is your final objective. The lore significance of the World Spear cannot be said enough. This World Spear is effectively the most important part of the Slayer's story, because all the events preceding it is what made the Slayer into what he is today. The World Spear piercing through Argent D'Nur effectively created the Doom universe that we know of today, similar to how the Big Bang created our universe. To finally be able to visit it firsthand and get some much needed answers is fantastic, so good job on that, id Software. Now I know some people have mentioned that the aesthetics of World Spear and Reclaimed Earth are the same, but I have to disagree with that assessment, because people need to understand that world building and level design is done around the story, not the other way. Whether you agree or not, Doom Eternal does have a story, therefore it needs to flow with that story. World Spear also introduces meat hooking points and implements it within its platforming sections. Since I personally really enjoy the platforming in this game, the meat hooking sections are a much welcome addition, and I would love to see more innovation in this regard, either in future master levels or in future Doom games. The meat hook points are also located within only a select few arenas on World Spear. Given the fact that the arenas are absolutely huge, it is a bit disappointing to see this amazing feature not used as often as it should, which is, again, why I said that this DLC has incredible potential, but it doesn't quite reach it in some key areas. A good example of this is the first arena, which is incredibly huge, probably 2 or 3 times the size of a Trial of Malagog. It features a meat hooking point directly in the middle, which makes that arena an absolute blast to play through. The next arena features a purple goo, but unfortunately does not feature a meat hooking point. If there was any place to put the meat hooking point, it was there. Most of the initial arenas are filled with a healthy amount of heavy demons, a few super heavies, but a lot of imps, and I mean a hell of a lot of imps, pun intended. This is the part where I agree with the higher skilled players. I would have liked seeing some variation in the fodder demons, like having a few gargoyles, some terminators, shield soldiers, and some normal soldiers as well. This mission also introduces new enemy types and a new weapon, which replaces the Crucible slot. It is known as the Sentinel Hammer, but after speaking with Hugo, he confirmed that this hammer is actually called the Anvil Hammer, and just trust me on this. I've spoken to him in private, but of course I can't give out any details about the call because it is G14 classified, so you'll just have to take my word for it. I will be talking about the new enemies and the Anvil Hammer in its own section a bit later on in this video. Now moving on to the second level, Reclaimed Earth. It is also another stunning and beautiful location, and the lore significance of this location is very easily glossed over when you compare the damage that was done to Earth on missions such as Hell on Earth, Super Gornest, and Final Sin. It is so incredible to see the results of your actions and coming back to see life return to the planet that was mostly wiped out by the demons, seeing what's left of humanity's resistance, painting messages about the Doomslayer, about you, the savior of mankind, but also their instrument of vengeance for the lives that have been lost. Reclaimed Earth does feature the meat hooking points in its platforming sections, but unfortunately they are only in the platforming sections. You won't find them in any of the arenas, which is a bit of a shame because the very first arena looks like a perfect place to have this feature. Reclaimed Earth also has a small swimming section here and there and some purple goose sections, but they're quite far and few in between, and they don't overstay their welcome, so I'm perfectly fine with them being in the game. After finishing Reclaimed Earth, you then find yourself in the very heart of Hell itself, the capital city of Immora. The start of this level is one of the best cinematics to ever exist in any video game. especially when you couple that with the music. Again, the lore significance is extremely high, and if you've noticed, in this DLC, you visit the 3 most important and fundamental realms that exist in the Doom universe. These 3 realms are what make Doom, well, Doom. You have Argent Dinur, you have Earth, and Hell, a perfect trio of areas to visit where things all started from, before closing the chapter of the Slayer's story. For now. Now speaking of music, all the tracks in this DLC are absolutely phenomenal and perfectly gives off the feeling and emotions of what you should be expecting depending on whichever level you are on. My new favorite track is the one from the World Spear, the combat music, where you can hear the chanting of Kar and Tuk, which just adds so much more emotion to when you're fighting demons. Now, I'm no professional, but one problem I have noticed is that the music does not have a lot of highs and lows. There is little variation with the volume of the music. It almost seems as if it has been normalized or ran through a compressor to make all the instrumentals have a similar volume. A good example of what I would like to have heard is when you hear the war chant in the World Spear combat music. I would have liked to hear the background tune to be a lower volume and the war chant to be at a higher volume. This would have given the soundtrack a little bit more oomph. But again, I'm not a professional, so if the music sounds good to me, that's really all I care about. Now moving on from the music, let's talk about the bread and butter of this DLC, the new enemies. Well, the 4 new enemies which are just reskin enemies, plus there's one additional one which is, well, I'll talk about it a bit later. My philosophy for difficulty is quite simple. Difficulty through complexity. If you're simply buffing up an enemy by increasing its stats, then I find that to be lazy game design. But if you're going to add additional mechanics, or even just one mechanic, then I can find that to be a much better solution. So I'll be reviewing the new enemies based off that philosophy. 3 of the demons appear in the first level of World Spear, and they are as follows. So first we have the Screechers. They look like your standard demonic zombies you can find in the base campaign, but they now have a purple glow or cloud around them. When they are killed, they let out a massive cry that buffs all enemies within the arena for some time. The enemies hit harder, move faster, and take less damage. Now I personally like the Screecher. It is an interesting and a better version of the buff totem mechanic. This is because the enemies will be buffed purely by your own actions. You have full control on whether enemies are buffed or not, whereas the buff totem purely exists to be found and destroyed. It serves no other function. I mean, as soon as you see a buff totem, that then becomes your highest priority, because if you don't destroy it, demons will keep spawning and the remaining demons will just attack faster. One thing that I like is that sometimes I might throw a grenade, a rocket launcher projectile, or a sticky bomb, and as soon as the projectile leaves the barrel, I know in that very split second that I have made a mistake, and I need to modify my playstyle to avoid getting hit for a while. This level of instantaneous feedback is great, and really helps players like myself learning from our mistakes without being too punishing. Unfortunately though, the Screechers are not really used that often, as one would expect from a Doom Eternal DLC. The consequences of killing a Screecher early is not as severe in most arenas, because most arenas are massive, and if your movement is good or even average, then you can completely avoid the enemies until the buff wears off. But the inclusion of the Screechers will create a new framework for harder or better levels to be created in the future, for whoever that wants a challenge. The next enemy that you will face is the Armored Baron. These are a variant of the normal Baron from the base campaign. They now have a layer of armor that eventually gets destroyed temporarily after enough damage has been inflicted. Now you can technically use any weapon, but their resistances to every weapon except the plasma rifle is very high, so it's not even worth using any other weapon. They also have a temporary weak point mechanic, which is extremely similar to the Marauder, where they charge up their fist, and you'll see a green flash, again just like the Marauder. When you shoot their fist at the correct time, their armor is destroyed and they are then able to be killed. The armor returns after about 10 seconds, but using a basic super shotgun and ballista combo will take them out relatively easily. Similarly, they are also barely utilized in the DLC, but overall, I really like this enemy because it has now innovated upon a standard Baron, who are just pressure units but also bullet sponges. Then the third enemy that you will fight in World Spear are the Stone Imps. These are another variant on the normal Imps, but they now have a few different abilities. They are extremely resistant to most weapons and weapon mods. For example, it takes about 4 or 5 close range super shotgun shots to put it into a glory kill state. But they are extremely weak to the auto shotgun mod for the combat shotgun, where only 2 or 3 hits at close range is enough to destroy them completely. They have an ability where they charge up into a ball like Sonic the Hedgehog, and they'll roll directly into you, causing you to get disoriented and get knocked back for a short distance. Personally, I'm not too fond of this enemy. They more or less exist to make the auto shotgun mod more viable. And yes, I am aware that they are susceptible to the destroyer blade and micro missiles, but then nevertheless, they don't really bring any new mechanics to the game. And again, just like all the other new enemies, they're only used in a few select areas. Then once you get to Reclaimed Earth, you will then have a fight against the Cursed Prowler. These Cursed Prowlers add a new layer into the combat loop for better or worse. They function like a normal Prowler, where they remain far away from you throwing projectiles, and occasionally they will vanish and teleport close to you and attack you a couple of times with their claws. These Cursed Prowlers have an added effect to all of their abilities, whether it is ranged or melee. If you are hit by any of their abilities, you will be cursed. This debuff prevents you from dashing and using any lock-on based weapons, including the meat hook, but only on the Prowler. After you've been cursed, the Prowler's AI will change, where it will start avoiding you and even running away from you, while the poison deals consistent damage every second. The only way a cursed Prowler can be killed if you are cursed is through a blood punch. This is the main point of contention within the community. Now, normally you can get a blood punch charge by glory killing 2 fodders or 1 heavy or super heavy, but the fact that you can't dash can potentially make or break your runs. I personally like the Cursed Prowler because they add a new layer to the combat loop and are now a very dangerous addition to the roster. And there's only a few of them throughout the DLC, so they don't really overstay their welcome. However, I believe that some tweaks to their AI or functionality is required. And finally, once you get to Emora, you will fight against the elite guards of Emora, also known as demonic troopers. They are, unfortunately, nothing more than loot bags. They cannot be chainsawed and cannot be glory killed. They are killed with just 1 bullet from any weapon, after which they'll drop a little bit of ammo for each weapon that you have. In fact, the best way to kill them is by using the meat hook, because that'll drop roughly 20 armor shards for you and the usual ammo drops. You get all of this without spending a single bullet. They honestly serve nothing more than a slight speed bump, because their AI is quite basic, and their aim is, well, let's just say that these demonic troopers are Doom's version of stormtroopers from the Star Wars prequels. But of course, I do understand that they did not have enough time to fully flesh out these enemies because of the time constraints and the current global situation. So I can't fully blame them, and I fully understand that they did what could be done given the situation at hand. Now, speaking of enemies, the DLC comes with these gore nests, which are known as Escalation Encounters. These encounters have 2 waves of increasing difficulties. The first wave is required while the second wave is optional. Completing the first wave of any of these escalation encounters is pretty straightforward and manageable by an average player. Upon completion, you will be rewarded with an Anvil Hammer upgrade, which will either reward you with more resources after using the hammer, or enemies will be stunned for longer. So all around, great upgrade options. The second wave is noticeably challenging but still relatively balanced. I actually really enjoy the second waves of all of the escalation encounters. Upon completion of the second wave, you will be rewarded with a skin for the Slayer. I really love this system because the first wave is required for you to get some sort of tangible benefit with your gameplay. The second wave is purely optional, but still rewards you with a skin to show off your achievements. So my overall review of these escalation encounters is positive, and I'm glad that they exist. I'd like to see some more innovation done upon these in the future. Maybe include this with some sort of horde mode mod if they decide to go with this route. Now for the single best part about this DLC, the Anvil Hammer. Leading up to the release of the DLC, Hugo Martin would regularly tease the player base that this new weapon will become a core mechanic to the combat loop, and it will be difficult to go back to the standard version of the game. After having played through the DLC, I can honestly say that he was correct. I absolutely love this hammer, and I can't stop playing without it. The way the hammer works is quite straightforward and actually a lot of fun. The hammer is not like the Crucible where you can use it to instantly kill a select demon. This hammer functions as a new resource that you'll be managing just by being proactive while playing the game. You can generate a charge by glory killing 2 demons, destroying 2 weak points, or doing a combination of both. Once you have the charge, pressing the key will cause the Slayer to jump up slightly and smash the hammer into the ground. This ability is known as Anvil Smash, and trust me, I spoke with Hugo, it's all true, just trust me on this. The hammer will instantly destroy any fodders nearby, and it will also stun heavies and super heavies for a short duration. Any enemy that is simply hit by the hammer's AoE attack will drop ammo, so the more enemies you have clumped up, the more resources you'll get. If you douse the enemy in Flame Belch or Ice Bomb, then using the hammer, the enemies will drop more armor or health respectively, along with the usual ammo. If you use the hammer efficiently, this can pretty much make the chainsaw obsolete, which I don't think is a bad thing, and here's why. My personal playstyle within Doom Eternal is more focused on defensive plays, so using glory kills more often to create small pools of health and armor lying around, just in case I need it. This hammer allows me to be more aggressive with my playstyle, and it rewards you for it. The more aggressive you are, the more dangerous you will become. This hammer has shifted my old playstyle into a combination of defensive and offensive, and I'm glad that it did. This is definitely the best part about this DLC, and I really hope it continues in the future. And trust me, I don't have any bias whatsoever towards hammers. Just trust me on this.
Without my hammer, I can't.
Are you
Anvil?
the god of hammers?
And now for the final part of this review, the final boss, which I think is probably the biggest point of contention within the community. Now, if we look at the boss on its own merit, it is a good boss fight that has a healthy amount of mechanics that are visually distinct from each other, and also provide a satisfactory ending once it is complete. However, the boss fight is basically a combination of the Gladiator boss fight from the base campaign and the Marauder. Unfortunately, this is where I have to agree with the people that are not entirely satisfied with the boss fight, and I do feel that it is a bit of a disappointment compared to the caliber of what id Software can create. The boss fight does feel, at some points, that it drags on for a little bit too long. I would have liked seeing a shorter version of the boss fight with the mechanics happening more often, but again, that is just my opinion on the matter. But while I am slightly disappointed, I need to mention that Hugo Martin, in his latest livestream, said that creating a boss fight like the Gladiator takes approximately 1 whole year to create, to program, to test, to 3D model and all of that. So the fact that they had a small amount of time, plus working in an inefficient environment, which will take quite a while to get accustomed to, I just can't fully put the blame on them, and I know that they tried their best. This is something that can be improved in the future, and with future master levels. But nevertheless, I still personally really enjoyed the boss fight, and it gave me a feeling of great satisfaction to see the hammer playing a massive role in this fight. So, in conclusion, the DLC has a hell of a lot of positives, and all of my playthroughs of this DLC have been an absolute blast. I keep replaying this DLC more often than Tag 1, because the overall pacing and combat mechanics are great. The platforming is fun, but it is not tedious, and the arenas are quite fun to do, and they're massive, especially when you couple that with the second waves of Escalation Encounters, which are supposed to be more challenging. Overall, I am very excited to see what things they'll come up with next for the master levels. I do feel, however, that some tweaks can be made throughout this DLC, which I will be covering in its own separate video. If you enjoyed this review, which is my first time making a review, then make sure to like and comment below to let me know what you think. If you like the content that I make, then make sure to subscribe. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video or live stream. Alright guys, what time is it? What time is it? Come on, you can do better than that. Bang! Yes! It's either Anvil time or Anvil Smash. You can choose whichever one you want to say.